And one time, a guy hit me in the right wheel well. I had one wheel that would go down and one that wouldn't. So I'd make it pull up like that, hope that it would snap down and everything else. And finally got to the point where obviously it wasn't going to come down. My wingman inspected it. So I was going to blow him down with my bottle, and I blew, and it didn't go down. So here I am with one wheel up and one wheel down, and everybody on the ground is giving me the message, stay up there, don't come down. And they kind of had a big scene down there on the airfield. They moved all the aircraft off the right-hand side, and people came from all over the island to watch a guy. They'd never seen anybody land a Corsair with one wheel before. So by the time I got time to land, I was kind of tired of the whole program. But I tell you, I made a very egg-breaking, beautiful landing. Gently put it down, and it just slowly slid over there, and it just went over the ditch a little bit like that, you know.
His last name was Franks, got shot down, and he was off the island, but the wind was blowing him back towards the island, and the poor guy had was in his life raft, in his life raft, and he had his dive marker out, and you could see him swim, paddle like crazy, and he would go out away from the island, and they'd get away from him, and then he'd get tired, and they'd blow back, and then he'd swim back. And finally, they sent a PBY in, but the PBY landed and broke apart. Instead of one guy, they had 8 guys in there. So they sent a DE in and picked all of them up.
We had somebody who shot down during a strike like this. Why, he would head for calm water where PBY could land and pick him up, air sea rescue. We would make strafing runs on the Japs to keep them from getting a hold of him. And makes you feel pretty good when your guys are out there and they're up above you right away.
One night, it was that same night, we came back because it was late, and we were all coming back with holes in them. Some people shot up and whatnot. Some people that were geared down and one thing and another. And they were, the 2 runways were lit up with flares. So there were 4 lines of flares, the bomber strip and the fighter strip. Some guy landed and wiped out all the flares on the right side of the bomber strip, and a fighter wiped out the flares on the left side. It was a really wild night coming back after all that action. And Johnny Hench, the guy I told you about, the wild man, he was in a hurry to get back because he was running real low on gas, and so he wanted to land. They shot some flares at him, and he didn't pay attention to them, being Johnny, and he saw these 2 rows of lights. He thought that was the runway. What it was a revetment area. It was all coral and airplanes parked in there. So he landed the Corsair right in the middle of all that and walked out of it and lit his cigarette. And the Corsair was repaired. I'll tell you, that thing, it was a tough bird, and we were very glad about that.
And as I'm coming back, my engine started conking out, and I was losing altitude. I got down to 1,500 feet, and I thought, well, am I going to bail out or land in the water? And I decided I'd bail out, and the motor cut out cold. And I undid my straps and then undid my radio cord, and I had 1 foot up on the canopy. I slid the canopy back, and I had 1 foot up on the side of the plane. And I said, let's see, they say dive for the wing, because if you go straight out, you may get hit by the tail. So I was about ready to go, and the engine cut back in. So I climbed back in the plane, and I nursed this thing along, and I spotted an island up ahead, and I said, my God, there's an emergency landing strip on this island. And I said, I don't know if it's friendly or enemy, but that's where I'm landing right now, because the motor was still cutting in and out. And I was going to be sure I made that island, and I made the fastest landing of my life, so I didn't stall out before I got there. I got to the end of the runway and taxied over to the side, and thank goodness there were 2 Marine mechanics there to greet me. They said, we'll check your plane out for you, have a cup of coffee, and we'll have it ready for you, and you'll be on your way, which they did. And what happened was my gas line had been severed, and the gas was leaking, and the engine kept cutting in and out. And they had fixed it, the engine was running fine, and I did make it back to home base, naturally. But that was a very exciting mission.
We were on a high altitude combat air patrol one morning, which was a pre-dawn takeoff, and it was just about daylight, and I was about 25,000 feet, and all at once my engine quit. And we were about 60 miles out to sea, and I did the restart procedures 2 or 3 times without success. So, you know, you sort of relive a lot of your life in a very short time. And lo and behold, I was debating what to do at about 8,000 feet. The engine started running. I wasn't doing anything except letting it glide. I have no accounting for that other than the great and wonderful higher power that we all live by. It's the man that started the airplane, not me.
The long flights we have were escorting the patrol boats, and they would go up and orbit outside the target areas in Japan to cover the B-29 raids. Because the B-29 guys that get shot up, they'd have a place to go to land their troops for the guys to pick up, and we'd go along and strafe the shorelines to protect the PBY. We was there strictly to protect the rescue P-boat.
I was in a tail end Charlie in that. When after I did my dive, I was in that I noticed off the wing tip that there was a whole bunch of Japanese coming down from another island. There was kind of a causeway that they were on. They were just walking with shovels and whatnot. And so I thought, well, I can't pass this up. So I did a quarter roll and started firing. And it took me right over their little, like a town, like a village. And that's where I got hit by. They must have had a whole bunch of machine guns on there because they shot the thing. I had hits from the propeller back to the rudder. And at the time, all I could hear was a few bunk, 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 you know, like somebody's with a dagger or something was jabbing the airplane all over the thing. PBI's would always go out ahead of us. So they'd get to the target about the same time we did, but they would stay way out of range sideways. And when somebody was shot down, they'd come in and land, pick him up, and take him back to his base. So that's what happened with me. He must have hit about 10 or 11. These big waves, they were so big that the airplane would just stagger in the air, you know, you could feel it shudder and shake. Hard to get up speed when that's happening. But he got off anyhow. And he came back and they had me in a bunk. I didn't get a scratch. Pilot came back and he said, well, I said, if I'd have known that it was that rough out there, I'd have never picked you up this way. And of course, I didn't argue with him because I was pretty glad to get out of there.
Patrol boats, the rescue boats, the PBMs, the PBYs, were headquartered at Okinawa. Admiral Erdman's ASR. The Air Sea Rescue in World War II was so good. That's why you ask a pilot whether he was afraid or whether or not he's going to get back or not, you never entered your mind because it didn't matter. You knew that your buddies and the P-boats were going to be out there to find you. And I've had that experience.
It was Pyongyang-do, right out on the very western edge of Korea, and I was going to go make a crash landing on the beach down there. When I got down there and looked at it, the tide, of course, you remember when Incheon was 17 feet, 14 or 17 feet. And so the beach over there was about like it is in Daytona. I said, I'm not going to make a crash landing. I'm going to put my wheels down. I put my wheels down, made a wheels down landing on the beach, just like landing on a runway. And so there were no Americans on the island, but there was a British mechanic down there, and he said, you're lucky. And the last 3 gallons doesn't register on the stick. Well, it didn't register on the stick, but the engine was still running when I got down there. And so that British mechanic, that's who was down there on it, and there had some other planes that had landed down here, he said, this is it, and I think it's going to work. So he worked on it. This was in the morning when I took off. That afternoon, he said, I've got it ready to go. I did a foolish thing. I took off. In the meantime, the tide had come in, and I didn't have that much beach to take off with. It was foolish, very bad decision. And I told, after I got into the air, I called back to the carrier for the group coming in to bomb North Korea. I said, if anybody else gets shot down, don't let them land wheels down on the island because the tide is up and it's soft sand. So that afternoon, one of the guys got shot. And he came over and landed wheels down on the beach, went over on his back, and burned.
By then the air-sea rescue was real good. We used to have 3 rescue planes, one on each corner of Japan and one at the bottom, and 3 subs out there too. So the war got more civilized in the one sense from our point of view.
We carried 3 tanks. We carried the two wing tanks, and I believe our center line was a 300-gallon tank. And we'd lean it back and set it up at 1750, 1800 RPM, and you have to watch your pressure so that you didn't beat up the engine, because you put too much manifold pressure, low RPM, it's going to shoot the rods. And I did this with one airplane. I made on my second assignment as a escort for a P-boat. I got about halfway up to Japan, and under about 1200 overcast and very, very rough seas, 25, 30 knot seas, and my engine just quit. It just quit. I'm sure rods went on it. It just quit, and at a very slow speed, I just barely had time to ease it down to the water. And of course, with big swells, you don't make this nice, smooth water. You just have to keep your speed, and the water comes up and gets you.
And you happen to hit the billows incorrectly, if the payout of the lift was such that you dove right into the waves like hitting a brick wall. That was bad.
And I was very lucky. I don't know where I hit, but I hit fiercely into the water, and my friends that orbited me said the plane stayed afloat. I got banged up on the head a little bit, and I don't remember everything, but they said I got out and run off the wing.
And Red went down. I mean, he lost his engine. I don't know what the reason was, but he went down, and we saw him, but everybody was running out of fuel. So we went back, and I think it was early enough in the day that I came back with my division, and we couldn't find him. So it got dark, and we went back to Okinawa.
The water was so rough that the PBY couldn't handle it. They orbited me. When it's about noon, they stayed with me till sundown. Then they had to leave. And my 2 buddies that orbited me that afternoon. One of them just died just a few weeks ago, and they all left me. They all left me. So I was out there all night.
A flying boat, a PBY, tried to land, but it couldn't. The seas were too heavy. So there was Red out in his little rubber life raft in the China Sea, and we had to wait till dawn next morning to go out. They found him.
I had dispensed all my dye marker and my flares, so the next morning I had nothing. And but here again, I was not afraid, because I had my buddies, and I knew that they was going to come out and try to find me. That same crew come out. I never got to thank them. I don't even know who they are. They found me. They passed me one time, and the seas are still very rough, and it's a low overcast. And they do the square search, for the rescue. I thought they got to be coming by close again. I had my mirror. That's the only thing I had left. And this was the old mirror, the old flat mirror with the cross on it. And I knew how to use it because of training. Thank God for the training, And I remember I had to lay back on my raft, and to get the cross lined up. As he flew by me, and he was quite a ways by me. And the next thing you know, I seen it lay over, and he obviously had seen me come back. And he still couldn't land. Had to call a P-boat out, and the PBM come out.
They sent out a PBM. PBM were doing a miraculous job. High seas. Actually got the boat down on the water and picked him up. He had been in the water at that point in time 24 to 36 hours.
And he made, I don't know how many passes he made, but he finally, the theory is that there's so many swells that sooner or later there's going to be a little flat spot. And he made those passes, and he got down. I couldn't see him when he got down until he drifted back. They drifted back, got to me, cut an engine, and when I'm going up and down like this, the guy reached down and grabbed me by the collar, and he got me on, and they JADO'd off and took me back aboard the Pine Island, USS Pine Island.
The fact that he was picked up, he was found, was something that was real miraculous, because we had lost another fellow in a similar situation, Ken Ward, gone down through an overcast, and we never found him. We were lucky when we got Red back. And he was lucky too, because if he hadn't got picked up that day, we were about ready to divide all his gear up, and when he came, if he got back, he wasn't going to have anything there.
They came around and said they needed one more pilot, so I said, okay, I'll go. And it was Sunday, and I didn't go to church that morning, went flying. And we went up to Duke of York, which was out front of Rabaul. And we dive bombed, dropped our bomb. We were strafing the airfield, and I remember I was shooting at an outbuilding, and all of a sudden my engine quit, so I assumed somebody shot my fuel line out, because it just, boom, dead. So you don't ever want to be captured by the enemy. I'll use the nice term now. And we pulled up. I pulled up because I had a lot of speed and headed for the water. And as I pulled up, I pulled my emergency IF on, which unfortunately didn't work, but that didn't matter. I had 3 buddies, actually. So I go out to the water, and I finally get in there, and I had to, you're trying to tell people what's going on, but all of a sudden the water's there, and boom, I hit the water. And my first reaction is, all of a sudden, it pops up, and my hatch had slammed shut, and I pull the hatch back, and already she's starting to sink. She's going nose down, and I'm standing on the panel of the airplane by that quick. And I could hear the people talking, so I picked up my radio, and I said, I'm okay. And I started to get out of the aircraft, and I forgot to unplug the cord, and I jerked my head, and I jumped over the side, kind of paddled away. And my parachute had a lot of air in it, and keeps pushing your head under the water. And I got the bottle, popped it, and that thing just comes boom. Great, just works like you're supposed to. So I climbed into the thing, and then I paddled around, picked up my gloves, picked up my flight helmet. I guess I was checking things, and all of a sudden I realized it was dripping blood, I didn't think about it. I said, I saw something was happening. And finally I figured out I'd been injured in the crash. And so I took the kit out, took a Band-Aid and stuck it up there, and not really much aware of it. And then I got my little paddles out and started paddling away, like this from the island. And what happened is I guess they were shooting at me from palm trees, because you could hear the shots as they hit the water. You get the ping. And I didn't realize that's what it was at first. I was trying to figure out what it was. So then I got out of the boat and paddled and pulled the boat after me. And the guys were wondering what the heck I was doing, because they were circling over me. And then the next shift, you might say, come in of 4 aircraft, and they circled over me, and they all had bombs. And then a little while later, roughly an hour, I looked up, and here comes that old PBY at me. And it's just a straight wing with like a pencil underneath it. And it was the prettiest airplane in the Navy to me. And he had 2 Corsairs with him. And he comes around, he puts that thing in the water, and I paddle over to him, and I got on the ladder. And when I hit that ladder, I absolutely collapsed. I could not get up that ladder. And those guys lifted me in, put me on the stretcher, and picked up my boat and everything else, and took me back and took me to Green Island. And they took me into the hospital and sewed me up because I was injured on the head. And back then they had medicinal brandy in the Navy, and they used to put 10 bottles in a carton. And the doctor gave me 2 cartons, 1 under each arm, and that helped cure me.
My wingman, later in World War II, he flew over 200 miles with the whole bottom of his engine gone. Cylinder head temperature off the wall, and 0 oil pressure, 200 miles, which of course we throttled back, and it was just a magnificent airplane. One thing we called for air sea rescue when Walt got hit. And that's so the Wilkes-Barre cruiser launched a float plane. And then pretty soon, here comes the float plane. And he flies, we were going slow enough for him, so he just joined up with us. And finally, Walt's engine quit and froze up. And he says, Jim, my engine just quit. I said, Walt, I see that, you know. And so he landed on alongside the Wilkes-Barre, and they picked him up. But they wouldn't release him till the ship, Bunker Hill, gave him 20 gallons of ice cream. Then he was transferred to a destroyer, and they wouldn't release him either until they got their 20 gallons of ice cream. So it cost the Navy 40 gallons of ice cream.
We had been up to Rabaul, and we're coming back. The bombers were well on the way back. We come back over New Island, and I had a new wingman flying on my wing, and he was, I guess, fairly inexperienced or something. And on the way back, I saw a little peninsula down there with a Japanese ship, small ship there, and I thought, oh, that's a nice target for me. And there's this little peninsula right there, sort of like, you know, when you're shooting ducks, you have a little place like that, a decoy. Well, that's what it was, but I didn't know it. So we started on the run, and they must have been 30, 50 calibers or whatever they had, and 20 millimeters, whatever they were, shooting at us. And I knew what the thing to do was get there fast. So here I am, raising hell, going down low, 6 machine guns, blowing them up, dirt flying in every direction and everything. And we're over it, everything's fine. I look around for my wingman, he wasn't there. Instead of following me, he decided he didn't want any of that, and he pulled up like this, and they shot him. And I went over and conducted him down, and it was kind of like a movie. Joe Murray was the guy's name. And just before we had a scarf you could use if you had to, and a little rubber boat and all that kind of stuff. And he, like in the movie, just before he hits, he goes like that. You know, I saluted him back, and the airplane landed pretty well and went down in 14 seconds. And in that time, I didn't see him do it, but he got out in his little yellow boat and wrapped this thing around he hit his head and wrapped this thing around him. And I kept calling for Dumbo because I felt sure that he was down there. So I just circled slowly up and down, I couldn't see him. But I just knew if the wind wasn't blowing that bad, he wouldn't drift too far. And I had never heard of an airplane staying up 6 hours in a Corsair, and I don't know if it was quite that long or not, but by Dumbo finally came, they landed about a half a mile from where I was circling and picked the guy up. So I started home.
Good old zooming. When we were at Spirit of Sanders, they decided to hook us up with rockets. So they put the Zero launchers on that plane, and we had to go out and practice with them. And on one flight, zooming, he was a different division. He made an approach on the target, and when he pulled out, he just flipped the trim tab, the elevated trim pad, like that, and the whole horizontal movable surface came off. He lost it. And the Spirit of Sanders was sort of shaped like this, with a big lagoon and then the mountains getting higher and higher up here. And that's where he was headed, right up there. And he kept, one way or another, getting a little more altitude, and then he saw he wasn't going to make it. So he bailed out, and just as he hit, when his parachute opened, he hit the ground and broke everything in his pack, with the exception of one of these signal mirrors and a machete. And we knew that Zumi wasn't dead. There wasn't any question. That guy was not dead. We knew that. We couldn't find him. About 2 weeks later, up here in this lagoon, when somebody was dive bombing, practicing, here was a signal mirror flashing. And there was old Zumi. He came back and he had bows and arrows over his shoulder, bunch of bananas, an old rusty rifle that he'd gotten from the natives. The natives on that island were friendly. Below us in Malakula, they were headhunters, so you always stayed away from them. And then Zumi got malaria, even though we were taking Ativan, and he was supposed to be in the hospital when we left. And he got out and swiped a Jeep and got to the boat before it pulled out.
But Bob McClurg was one of these guys, we call him Photo Joe. He always had a camera, a small camera with him, and even took pictures of our division in flight you know, out over Bougainville. But he had a harness made up where he had an extra compass on it, and he had an extra knife on it. He had rounds of ammunition for his .45 on it. He had some candy bars on it. He was all set. If he was shot down, he was going to be prepared. And he was always a great fisherman and a great hunter. So I say, now there's a guy who will always come back if he's shot down.
It was one of these nights where it's no stars, no moon, just black. And here we are out in the Pacific when there's no towns lit up or to help you. So anyhow, the thing that you notice is that your wingman calls you and says, hey, you got a tail hook hanging down, or your, not tail hook, but your tail wheel is hanging down. Well, we knew right away that it was a hydraulic leak, so I check it, and you know, it's dark in the cockpit. But anyway, I found out I couldn't do anything about it at that time, so I went ahead and flew the mission. Then coming back, I couldn't get my flaps down, of course. I did blow the gear down, and made a pass, and was able to touch down about as slow as I could get the airplane without having a problem flying it. So I touched down right at the beginning of the runway, and these lights, runway lights, were going by me so fast, shook me up. And there was nobody in the tower that said, hey, you're okay, you know, stay put. I didn't know if I'd had another 1,000 feet or 10 feet or what. Engine quit on me. I left the throttle up, full throttle, settled into a 3-point landing, and was rolling, and all of a sudden that power took effect, and it just rolled the whole airplane, cartwheeled it down the runway. I lost the prop a couple hundred yards ahead of me. The engine was out there about 500 yards, and both right wing and left wing came off, and I ended up, me in the cockpit in a gasoline tank, upside down. I was balancing on the canopy, which almost closed. I couldn't, it was about 5 inches open, but it was, all of the weight of everything was still on it, so I couldn't move it. So I managed to get rid of the parachute and everything else and ready to get out. And about that time, I felt the guys who were out there, ground personnel, came out and they lifted that airplane up at one end. And I was able to scamper out of the thing. I was all cut up from broken shards of plexiglass. But the doc sewed me back up, and about 3 weeks later I was back in the air in a Corsair. And that shook me. I didn't tell anybody about it. But anyhow, I got back to regained my skills and conquered this fear of the Corsair.
And I had engine failure after the ship, and I dropped out, figuring that, you know, sometimes you'll have a little pressure problem in the distributor or something like that, and the engine will falter a little bit, and you can recover, or you've got a little fuel block or something. But mine just totaled out and absolutely would not run. I made had 7 knots wind, made a decent water landing, little tail wheel dragging. But there's always that place, especially with the Corsair, that it's got to either be flying or be stopped, and it dives in, so-called your second. This is all okay, but it's not over till you get stopped. The stop thing is what's severe. I had a severe back injury and a head injury and broken leg, and marvelous rescue guys. I couldn't get into the collar because you have no strength. And my parachute was still buoyant, and my parachute was buoyant, and it floated me up, and it pushed my head underwater, but I could roll. And I would roll, and I'd get back up, and I'd get my head out of the water. And all the time, the guys just about to come down to get me, and I finally got enough energy that I got in the collar and got back on board, and It's an awful story from there on to getting back, and I spent 6 months in the hospital with the full body casts, and they sent me back on a damned repair ship, round bottom repair ship, and it took about 30 days to get back. It was a bad experience, but I deserved it because I wrecked a nice Corsair. That was my 5th one.
And then I had another one on fire that I put down on Ishima. But fire in an airplane, you just don't fool with. And I ended up landing at Ishima. It's an Army P-47 squadron. They had the same R-2800 Pratt Whitney engine that we have in the Corsair. So they repaired it for me. I spent the night there, and the next morning when I got up to watch them complete the work on my oil leak, I stood there and watched the Japanese envoy fly in a Betty bomber that was painted white with a big red cross on it. And I looked at this thing. This is something that 2 days ago I'd have been shooting at. And they taxied to the end of the airfield, got out, had a little huddle. They refueled the aircraft and they took off again. This was the group going to the Philippines to make arrangements for the surrender of Japan.
You know, there was a number of our planes that were shot up, and they would be put up at the end of the runway, and they would be blown up because they were too far shot up to even take back, and we certainly didn't want to leave them there. So it was another show that us ground crew guys had to watch from a distance, and it would just blow up. Then a bulldozer would come over and shove it into the sea. Another one would come over, because that's what it was economical to do it that way. There was just no way you can repair those planes. And we weren't going to leave them there for the Japanese people, even though they were to be civilians at that time.
But I love the Corsair. I love the fact we could leave a combat situation at any time we wanted to. It was our option then, and that was pretty nice.
My first contact with the Zero was at 25,000 feet, and I started to make a run on him, and he immediately pulled up in a loop and zoomed and come down towards me. At that time, the only way to get away from him was nose down, full stick, full throttle, full everything. And I started pulling out at 10,000 feet, and I pulled out on the water, and the airspeed indicator was against the pin. But he couldn't follow me because they weren't that rugged.
We had about 20, and this is about the most we could get out of our squadron that we could get in the air. Of course, we only had 28 pilots at the beginning, but if we got 20 planes in the air, we were lucky. But on our third mission, we were flying cover for the bombers, and that was our main purpose when we got out there, to protect the bombers. And we got up close to Bougainville on this third flight, and we were hit by about 40 Zeros. They came down on us.
You know, when you're shining a hose, squirting flowers or something like that, and the sun shines on it, some kind of sparkle, it looks like that. First time you see something sparkling over your wing like that, you wonder what it is for about 2 seconds. Then you realize some guy's got you with his sights and has an evil intent.
So the sky went up for grabs. The next thing I knew, I looked back and I had a Zero on my tail. I could see his guns blinking at me. And I said, boy, I'm out of here. It flashed in my mind what Pappy said to us early on.
Never dogfight a Jap Zero, because a Jap Zero can turn inside you. You can outdive them because you're heavier. You can outclimb them, but don't dogfight them.
Don't get into a dogfight with a Zero. The only way you'll get away is roll over and dive out, and that's when I did.
The Corsair had one advantage. It was fast. It could beat the Zero, and if you got in trouble, and I got in trouble a lot of times, you just point the nose down and head for home, and they couldn't stay with you.
With the Zero in World War II, they had trouble making left turns in the dives.
As long as you didn't get hooked into go in circles with them. The first rule was never get in a circle with a Tony or a Zeke, because your second rule is you'll be dead if you do. But one thing we could do, we could make a fast dive and turn, and we had wonderful aileron control in the dive. We got up to 350, and above that, we could turn like that and go away. And they had such a heavy load on their ailerons, they couldn't. They'd go shooting by. And if you're lucky, you could roll back, and you'd have them.
First combat mission, I came back with 27 holes in my airplane, so I was a real believer. But it happened in a freak thing. We were escorting the dive bombers, and we'd hit the enemy airfield, and we were flying back out and away from the field, and there were zeros all around the outfit. And I was flying wing on this fella, and all of a sudden he turned and headed back, right back to the enemy airfield, and left the whole formation. And it was just a minute before there were zeros all over us. And I ended up getting hit, and there was smoke in my cockpit. Well, we had this maneuver to get away from the Japs. Would push the stick full forward as fast as we could, and that created negative G on the aircraft, and I was able to lose him. But I came back about 500 feet, pulled out on the water. We were about 9,000 at the time. The fellow I was flying wing on, I didn't even know him. He was from another squadron. And the only reason it happened that way is because the flight leader that I took off from Guadalcanal, his engine quit partway up there on the way up to the strike, and I had to follow him down. He landed in the water. He got out okay. In fact, he got back to the squadrons later. His name was Major Tomes. But I was able to rejoin the formation, and I joined up. You're always taught to fly with another plane, and I didn't even know who it was or what squadron he's in. But anyway, what had happened when we were zigzagging over the bombers, he spotted a Jap come up under one of our planes and shoot it down. And as a result, he just saw red, and he was going to get that guy come hell or high water, and he broke formation and took after him. And I never saw the plane that he was after. But by the time he realized what he'd done, why, we were caught. But he got back too, but he had quite a few holes in his plane also.
Air Force outfit said that they had seen a Japanese carrier north of Rabaul. Well, of course, at Rabaul there were 3 enemy airfields full of fighters and whatnot. But, so here it is kind of late in the day, and we mounted a couple of divisions, and we flew over Rabaul to find this thing. And we had a little hassle on the way there. And we got there, it turned out to be a big barge. It wasn't anything else. And they had told us that the Tonys were not as fast as the Corsairs. When we're coming back, our wingman and I had 3 Tonys on our tail. And every time we make a little turn, they'd gain a little bit. And we were going the wrong way. We would just get ready to go back when they jumped behind us. So finally, we just did a split S and came right at them and went on. And they were behind us, and they never lost an inch. It seemed to me they didn't gain on us, but they didn't lose on us, but we had to actually use water injection to finally get away from them so we get back to Bougainville.
And we escorted our own Marines flying SBDs. So Jim McDaniel was in that formation somewhere, and I thought, by God, I'm going to be sure that they get the best damn cover by fighters that you can give them. Normally, we would just be high cover and stay up there and see if anything was going to happen. This time I followed them down in their dive. The difference was that they had dive flaps, and they could have a more or less vertical or close to vertical dive, whereas we didn't, so I had to weave going down. And then I pulled out, they dropped their bombs and moved on, and I pulled out about 300 feet over the airfield, that particular airfield, and I was going about 400 knots. And I saw a Japanese gun position, I suppose that's what it was, on stilts. So I went right by them, and I could almost see the startled looks on their faces. I went by probably not more than 100 yards away from their position, and they couldn't do anything to me or my wingman.
They warned us about traps, baiting, barges sitting there, and then they have you on the aircraft there to shoot you down. Well, I wouldn't join up on them because I knew the 2 guys behind me and me were going to get shot down. He might get through. And I signaled to him that we should go in abreast if we're going to do this. Well, he finally said yes. So we joined up abreast, and sure enough, as soon as we got close to the coastline, man, it just erupted. So obviously we'd have got nailed had we gone in there, in column.
Now, I got hit one time at the bottom of a strafing run, and we were probably doing 250 to 300 miles an hour at the bottom of a strafing run. And the guy blew out my windshield. He hit the bar up there that holds the cockpit window and blew that out, blew out the bulletproof windshield, so that there's nothing in there except 250, 300 miles an hour wind. We were so cavalier about going up and do that, I had my goggles up. And it's a wonder I didn't lose sight of both eyes. Well, when I got back to the carrier, I slowed everything down. I came back with about 107, squinting my eyes like this because there's pieces of glass everywhere. I couldn't go like that without hitting. My eye lashes and everything all below, up in here, all full of glass. If he had just been a millisecond later with that thing, because it hit about 10 inches up from the bar, hits the body of the airplane, it had probably gone right through my head. It's unbelievable.
The first time I saw this guy's bullets going over my wing, I knew that he was going to turn a little bit to try to kill me, and he was off to the right. So the doctrine was, as soon as you see that, turn right into the fire, because he's going to turn that way, and he did. And then I'm on the dive, and of course he followed me, but the Corsair was fast at a dive, and we had that control. And I never did get to shoot him down, but he disappeared anyway, and that was fine.
I got hit in the engine, yeah. I didn't think I was going to make it back, but I made it back up over to another island off of Okinawa and landed, and the oil pressure was down, I think down in the 50s.
Well, my plane was shot up by somebody that I never saw, and of course I just pushed over to get away from him, and thankfully our Corsairs could outdive the Zeros. They were big, heavy planes. So I dived down to about, I was up around over 20,000 feet when it happened. I dived down to around 5,000 feet, and flames were coming out of my engine. And I thought, this 145 octane gasoline is going to blow any minute. So I leveled out and started to go over the side, and I looked down, and there was Tabera Airfield right below me. So I thought, the kindest thing that could happen to me if I bailed out was that they would shoot me while I'm floating down before they get me on the ground. So I stuck with the plane and thinking if I got out over the water, maybe, a submarine would pick me up at night or something if I could survive. So I throttled back, and the flames died down when I throttled back. I was trailing a cloud of smoke, but anyway, so the plane, I made it all the way back. A couple of Navy pilots saw me and came over and joined up on me and escorted me all the way back to base.
Well, that's the thing. See, that was for all American planes. We had armament, good armament. We had self-sealing gas tanks. So as a result, you were able to get back to your home base.
We got chased with the MiG several times.
We saw one MiG in Korea. We were going in. He came bursting through our formation, and I don't even know if he shot at us or not. He disappeared.
Jet planes in those days, and maybe still so, they used a lot of fuel flying around near the ground. And so we would just get down there and do a Lufberry circle. The one behind us protecting the guy in front of him, just go a circle like this, and then keep edging that circle towards the water. And once we got over the water, we felt safe because they would not come and fight us over the water.
They always said, never hit the same target twice, because they'll be ready for you. And our flight leader of the executive squadron, we were up around Daegu, and looked like a real good target, and we set a lot of stuff afire, and we went back, and he led us back for another pass, and his plane got hit. Oil was streaming out of the bottom of his plane. He went down in a rice paddy, and I went down and circled him until he got out of the cockpit, and he was talking to us on the radio. And he said, don't fly over that village over there, they're shooting at you. And then they started to come out to the village toward his airplane. And I put a few holes in the rice paddies down there in front of them, and they bent over like they were working and never got any closer. I stayed around with him until a helicopter showed up.
And the helicopter came in with 4 P-51s as an escort. And they came in and picked him up. Well, as soon as the helicopter was in sight, I left because I was low on fuel. And I got back to, I think it was K-10. Taxied in, went straight in. I'd leaned that thing out until it was detonating some. And that engine quit while I was sitting in the chocks. So I didn't have anything extra.
I'll tell you about New Year's Day of '44. We were at 36,000 feet, and we were escorting Liberators, B-24s, over a ball. And I don't remember what level they were bombing from, but boy, the anti-aircraft fire came up. You can even see those 24s. I don't know how any of them got through, but some of them did get hit pretty badly. But on top of them shooting at them, at the bombers, they put some rounds right up there at 36,000 feet. And that's when my particular division, we dove out to avoid the anti-aircraft fire. And well, we got separated. I guess there were some clouds and so forth. But anyway, there were some bombers that were hurt, and they were limping. The rest of the formation went on, and there was one other Corsair there, and me. And we just scissored over those crippled bombers, trying to keep the Japs away. Of course, we couldn't keep them all away because the bombers were strung out. But every time you'd turn towards Zero, he'd break off and go out and try to come in from some other way to get after these crippled bombers. But what we wanted to do was to get them down the slot far enough, because there's a pickup area down there where if they ditch, the Dumbo comes in there, the flying boat comes in there and takes them. And that's what I was trying to do. But the funny part about that situation was, on New Year's Day of '44, all the records in the book say that there were no Zeros in the sky that day. But unfortunately, what happened was that when the bombers dropped their bombs, the guys went looking for Zeros, and they didn't see any. You know, your job if you're escorting bombers is to stay with the bombers. And this other guy and I, we did this. Today I don't even know who the fellow was. But anyhow, we scissored and so forth, back and forth. And some of those 24 Liberator gunners were pretty good, because I saw them drop several Japs into the drink. And hopefully some of them got back. But as I was saying, the first guys back said there were no Zeros, but there were Zeros there. But they left the bombers and didn't see the Zeros. And I wasn't even interviewed when I got back by the intelligence officer, because the earlier guys said there were no Zeros. So that's why the books all say there were no Zeros up there on New Year's Day.
Oh, the first combat mission I went on was escorting some SBDs to hit Caviang. They said there were 91 guns around Caviang. Section leader took us down. We got there a little bit after the SBDs hit, and they were really angry, so we took a shot at them, and I can remember that anti-aircraft coming across the sky and past us and then swinging back up again. So we got out of there without getting hit, but it was quite an experience to see that.
You'd see these great big, looked like tennis balls coming up at you. They were just barely floating up, but they were going a hell of a lot faster than that.
When you were over a ball, it just looked like between our bombs and our machine guns and their anti-aircraft fire, it was just like the whole country was just on fire like that.
And you'd see the flak coming up, I remember one time I was making a gunnery run. All of a sudden I see this red pinprick coming up at me, and the thing got bigger and bigger and bigger, and I thought, oh God, it was a shell, and it just went right over my head.
Ground fire, yeah, that probably was about as dangerous as anything.
A little of the anti-aircraft would break up around us when we're flying around 12, 14,000 feet, and that put black clouds up there.
I was lucky I never got hit.
Flew a lot of close air support in Korea. And, well, the Air Force were flying P-51s there, and they were always down. You know, they had the liquid-cooled engines, and they'd hit the radiator, and down it would come.
Oh, God. We just love that airplane. I frankly think that it was the best fighter of any nation in World War II. It just couldn't, you couldn't compare it with any other one. You could put the Mustang, for instance, in the water with a .22 rifle. Hit the cooling system, he's all over.
On one Corsair support hop, I heard a noise, and I came back when I landed aboard ship. I told, you know, we used to drive the plane captains crazy, I think. We'd say to them, there's something wrong. They'd say, what's wrong? Well, I don't know, it doesn't feel right. I mean, nobody really knew in those days. But I told the plane captain, I called my wingman and asked him to take a look, and I wasn't leaking anything, or there were no apparent damage to the aircraft. And I went down for the debriefing, and when I was being debriefed, the guy came down and he handed me a projectile about, inch and a half long. It looked like the tail end of a .50 caliber bullet. And I asked him where he got that, and he said, well, we used to sit on our parachutes, and they would have a rubber cushion. He said he found it between the parachute and the rubber cushion.
I came back one time, they said, did you see any gunfire or anything? No, I didn't see a thing. He said, well, you got 9 holes in your airplane. Because sometimes we'd go down to 500 feet to look at the target real good, and going through a valley or something, and 9 holes.
Went across to try to find the so-called carrier, went right over Torquay and all those. When I got home, I had 68 holes in the airplane. And that was a real rugged aircraft.
My brother has told me he was cited for flying his Corsair for 2 hours at the Chosin Reservoir, directing napalm drops on the Chinese. He had bullet holes in the sides of his plane from the hillsides.
Blew a hole in the airplane about that big around, about the size of a water bucket.
I got hit in Korea 28 different times, bullet holes in my aircraft. It was just part of the job.
Just as I pushed over to go in on the target, my airplane was instantly covered with oil. I couldn't see anything. And so I pulled out to the right and told the other guys to go on in, and I would follow in behind them, and I'd unload all the ordnance I had. It was going to drop somewhere in the middle of Shenanpo. So they did that, and I proceeded on out to the water. So if I had to make a crash landing, because I knew the amount of oil was on there, I was losing it pretty fast.
I took some flak over Kyushu down below, and I could see the water down there. And took some of the flak went into the parachute, and I knew the parachute wasn't any good after that. I didn't get hit, but it came in that way and went under the parachute I was sitting in. And I flew all the way back from Kyushu, knowing that if I had to land, that hole in the bottom would probably suck me right in, and I wouldn't bail out. But the old engine just kept ticking, and really no problem.
A lot of them come back, had holes all over them, and the rudders were beat up, and elevators were beat up, and ailerons are beat, landing flats are beat, but they still come back.
We landed in probably 11 o'clock in the morning. We had a long flight and go in. I was over at group headquarters, and I was CO at the time. And Colonel Munn, we were there, and he was not a sit-down type of thing, but he was just standing outside the tent. Everything was pretty crude, you know, at that time and doing. He said, "By the way, Bob, you're grounded." Says, "You got no more flying." And I said, "What's right?" "Well, you're going home in a couple of days here, in a few days," the way he put it. And I think Major Barnum was taking over, and he says, I think his name is Al. Al will be taking over from you in a few days. Would you stick around? I want you to stick around for a few days for overlap on him, but no more flying. You've had it. The plan at that time was to pull up the people who had been up there first and send them to a rear area. and work and train, fly there, and then come back up to the units again, and then the landing on Japan. Kyushu first, and then on around to the Tokyo area is the later thing, bring us back.
I was flying combat air patrol over the fleet, and I have never seen such a sight in my life. As far as your eye could see, the sea was covered with our warships. I mean, giant carriers in rows, and little carriers, and battleships and cruisers, and thousands of destroyers, and it was just a damnedest sight you ever saw in your life. At one time, you know, we had 110 carriers in the war. Now we have, what, 12 or something like that. But I thought to myself, well, if I could just take a picture of this and send it to the emperor, the war would be over.
The orders to us was, if you are captured, shot down, captured, and things like that, so you don't have to worry about secrecy anymore. Said we just soon them know everything we've got.
Oh, within a month we heard that there was a big bomb that was dropped. And that's all we knew. And it was a significant event that happened on Hiroshima.
Actually took the first information from the Japanese homeland on the dropping of the atom bomb. I happened to be on a radio watch at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I had no royal typewriter in front of me, and I typed out the news as it came. And the Japanese said that we had dropped a big bomb and destroyed their hospitals, and it really sounded devastated. And I typed out a letter to my mother, which I still have, about that occasion. It looked like the war might end, I said, with a bomb like that. Maybe we have some more. And of course, in a few days, we had another one.
But on the day they dropped the bomb on Nagasaki, I was escorting some photo planes that went over Nagasaki to take a before picture. And then we turned and came out, and they dropped the bomb, and we got on back to Okinawa.
We were at Guam, and the first bomb was dropped. And by the time I got to Hawaii, the second bomb was dropped, and the war ended when I was at Hawaii, because I was being rotated back to come into a new squadron for the invasion of Japan.
And on August 6th, Harry Truman gave the order to drop the big bomb, and it stopped the war. And as I give talks, people say, you know, that was a bad thing, that atomic bomb. And I said it was the best thing that ever happened to us, because there would be casualties on both sides 10 times what would happen without that bomb. And so, of course, we were all happy, and we had a big party the night that bomb was dropped.
The day the war ended, I was up over Japan, and we were getting shot at quite a bit. We were doing a lot of photographing, escort the photo planes up there at that time, because they were getting the maps ready for the invasion. And got back, and everybody was just raising cane, throwing their hands up, the war's over, the war's over. Pardon my expression, I says, the hell it is, look at that hole right there in my wing. Well, I got hit with some anti-aircraft fire on that. War was supposed to be over.
I was back in the States. I was going through night fighter training when the war ended, and I was headed back on out. And morale was okay. Let's get it over with. There wasn't much doubt about how it was going to end, but a lot of doubt of when it was going to end. Morale was pretty good. Of course, the Marines morale was always good with the Marines. Let us fight.
And we went out back aboard this carrier. We went to, ended up at Tokyo Bay just after they surrendered. And it was quite an experience to see. We went ashore and went into the Yokosuka Naval Air Station there, when they manufactured all their aircraft, a lot of aircraft, Navy aircraft. And it was just like they called a truce, or called everybody to lunch, and they all walked out and left their tools and everything on the machine. So they had these big tunnels back in the hills where they had something like 500 aircraft engines completely assembled, and there were all kinds of aviation supplies. So they could have continued on fighting us for some time if we hadn't dropped the bomb. Fortunately, it saved many, many lives.
We had standing orders when we landed that if you saw a Japanese airplane in and around that airfield or in outlying factories, you were to get into that plane and collapse the landing gear while it was still on the ground. In other words, it was a hand pump. You pulled a pin, that presumably unlocks the mechanism, and just pump it so it couldn't go up. That was one of the precautions that we also did see. And also one of the other things that kind of impressed me as we were walking around, because this Naval Air Station was on the sea. It was a number of oil drums that were stacked on the beaches, and it was my recollection that if they were to storm the Marines or the infantry at that particular time, those oil drums would be set aflame, and there goes a bunch of our troops. So I had seen that. But as the war subsided and the occupation moved in stronger and stronger, we found the Japanese people, as people, were very friendly, very polite, and you got to like them. And it sort of made one think about the hate that was engendered in us during the wartime, only to find that these people were decent people. And even at this day and age, it sort of tears me up to think about that. But war is war and peace is peace, and that's the way it is. Somebody had been ingenious enough to get a Jeep, and we piled into it and went to Yokohama. And it was just incredible, the devastation that you had seen. It was just nothing standing. It was just leveled completely. But Tokyo was spared, the royal palace was spared, and so they spared a lot of things in Tokyo. And I guess because it was of historic significance. The emperor there was like a god, and he knew that the Japanese people were committed to honoring that god, and we respected that. So we did not bomb his palace. And I guess that was an intentional thing, obviously, planned. But the other cities were just completely devastated.
Those of us who managed to survive World War II have had the good fortune of the benefits of having learned, having broadened our perspective, having had the discipline of that occasion, having known what it is to have something worth dying for, and then to know what's worth living for. Of the value structure, it's a culture that I think the 20 million veterans have that has never been, there's nothing been comparable since. It's why, if in fact there's a greatest generation, that's why it has happened. Because we all had our head shaves, matter of speech, but almost literally. And we all went through a common experience. We all were willing to die for something. And we have been much of the same disposition all of these years in whatever we've done.
My greatest acknowledgement that I get right now are from my peers and my squadron mates in World War II that I didn't think paid any attention to me at all. Now they tell me they used to watch everything I did and how I did it, and I've got a lot of compliments from my buddies, and I would not do this except in memory of. Some of them never got back. I lost some good buddies right on Okinawa, good guys. And having stayed in 22 years, I've lost others along the way. And I've told you about my accidents, and I have no idea why I survive them and others don't.
We had our losses, operational losses, rather than being shot down. I think we had more operational losses. We had a fellow by the name of Jordan. He was a good pilot. He took off on a pre-dawn takeoff one morning, and you had to go on to instruments right after takeoff because you didn't have a horizon, and he spun in off the end of the runway. And the fellow that took off after him, he evidently saw the explosion, and he ended in spinning in right on top of him too. Major Tomes, who was my flight leader, who was one great, he was taught gunnery at Miami. He was a great fighter pilot, and he was my flight leader. Then he ended up deciding to knock out an AA anti-aircraft battery on one of the islands that we'd passed. And he should never have done it. We were supposed to stay away from this. And he ended up going in and attacking it, and they knocked him out of the air. And he was a great guy. His wife's name on the plane, Nancy, I can still see it. That was a great loss to me. We had a Medal of Honor winner, and Bob Hansen in our squadron. And he ended up trying to attack that same AA position, and he got shot down.
We were supposed to go on a sort of a fuel run to see how far up we could go for future strikes. And there was a Major Day was head of our outfit. They called us Days Nights at that time. And he went up and we got up near Hiroshima and we made a run going down. And everybody followed everybody down. There was some ack-ack and they were trying to take it out. And we went through the first run, and then the second run, that was the mistake he made because we were up about 12 again, and we formed up, and he went down the same chute. And at that particular time, they had all the ack-ack, all zeroed in.
Dick was leading it, and I think on his second approach, second run onto the airfield, he got hit and just went right on in. Dick couldn't have been a better CO. He was a tremendous guy.
Master Sergeant Bietka. He was flying Corsairs in Korea. He was shot down somewhere above Wonsan. If they'd have sent a helicopter in to get him, that he may have survived, but we'll never know. But he was one hard-charging Corsair pilot.
Every fighter pilot had the attitude, it can't happen to me. It's not going to happen to me. And if you didn't have that attitude, you'd be in trouble.
And we were heading back to Sasebo after launching the last flight. I had flown earlier the day myself, twice actually. But the last flight was Jim English's flight of 4 aircraft. And he went up there, and in the course of the mission, he was shot down and killed. And it was particularly poignant to me and to anyone. He had a 3-month-old little baby girl who would never know him.
The only pilot that had a problem was a fellow who had, when he came with the Black Sheep, he had already spent 6 weeks in combat. And he had shot down a plane or two and been shot up once or twice. And he got to the point where he went to Pappy and he said, "Pappy, I just can't do it anymore." And Pappy said, "Well, if you can't do it, I'm not going to make you do it. That's your choice. You can do the mail runs for us and finish out the second tour, and then you'd be ready to go back to the States." And he said, "Fine." Well, would you believe that on about the second mail run where he would go back down to the New Hebrides and pick up the mail and whatever else that we needed, and he must have gotten lost in a storm, and he never came back. And I'll tell you, when those storms hit, they were rough.
A lot of the guys didn't really have all that much time in the Corsair before they went into combat. And I'm sure that played a role in the loss of some of them. Harry Bartle was one of them, and I mean, he's the main one that I can think of. He just didn't have a lot of time.
I think we only lost 4 pilots on Guadalcanal, and I can't say who, and we lost even fewer on the Okinawa.
We had a good squadron. Our initial squadron CO was Major Flaherty, and he was a great guy. I think we'd have followed him anywhere.
We were over Pyongyang, and we lost our CO and his wingman due to anti-aircraft fire. It was breaking so close to them, and they were flying pretty close. I don't know whether their planes collided or whether the AA got them, but I think the AA got them. Neither one of them showed up as POWs.
But there were many instances where fellows were shot down, and nobody in the squadron saw them get shot down. They just didn't come back.
Johnny Hinch, the wildman I was telling you about, had a young wingman, Jack King. And Jack King was an excellent pilot. And we went on our second mission. We were ready to go on our second mission to fly protected bombers to Rabaul. And Jack King came to me and said, "Major, I'm not going to be coming back. So here are the things I want you to send home. You don't send this one bottle of whiskey home," and so forth. And I said, "Oh, Jack, you're coming back, sure." he didn't come back, and Johnny Hinch didn't come back either. The last we saw of Johnny Hinch is he parachuted down in the middle of Simpson Harbor, surrounded by all these Japanese. He was in a little yellow life raft, and we stayed above him as long as we could until we ran out of gas. Kept hollering for Dumbo to come, and Dumbo was busy picking up other people. So that was the last anybody ever saw of Jack King and Johnny Hinch. They were our first two battle casualties. And Lou Russell, who got mad about that, and we were landing, and he decided he's going to go back and punish them, and he went back and an aircraft picked him off.
I lost this gentleman in the Okinawa campaign. He was from Pennsylvania, E.B. Reed. He and I had always pretty much decided that in daytime we would ride it in because the Corsair gave wonderful protection to the cockpit. And so he decided to ride it in. So the commanding officer, after he rode it in, said he made a good landing, and he made a pass over him. There he was in his life jacket out there with the left wing, and he pulled on up and came back, and he was gone.
A fellow named Bernie Saul, and I'll never forget Bernie Saul. He was Hebrew faith, and he was not scheduled to fly on Christmas Day. He didn't fly every day. So he volunteered to take a flight on Christmas Day, so at least one Christian would not have to engage in war during that particular significant day. He went up and he never came back.
Vernon Strong was a sailor on the Indianapolis. He was in high school with me. And he, after the war actually ended, of course, the Indianapolis was sunk. He went down with it.
And he bailed out and landed in the middle of Shenanpo Bay. And the helicopter came up from Seoul to pick him up. And we were all wearing poopy bag suits, we call them, you know, so you could survive in the water for some minutes anyhow, because if you landed without it, the cold water you'd survive only about 5 minutes, because the water temperature was about 40 degrees in January. And they winced him up, and he got all the way to the chopper and put his hands on the door and put his foot on the floor to pull himself in, and the cable broke. I remember the name, John Gary. When I landed, that's the only night landing I ever made on a carrier. It was just dark, the carrier had the lights on, and we looked as long as we could and never found him.
Blackie Rannigan got shot down over Rabaul, and we thought he was gone. And about 3 weeks later, up comes the submarine, and here comes Blackie with a bottle of champagne in each hand, and we were glad to see him.
Major Bill Porter. And when he started his takeoff, the wing folded on him. It hadn't been locked securely, but the wing folded, so we lost our commanding officer.
One of the tragic things that happened is we were getting ready to go home pretty soon, and they sent a young major out who'd been flying Corsairs in North Carolina, in the 2nd Marine Air Wing, I guess that was. And apparently he'd been flying a certain type of Corsair that when you change your wing tanks from one to another, it had a slightly different configuration, and it was the only thing I could figure. But anyway, when he was getting ready to relieve me, I took him up on a couple of flights up north towards Ishima and up that way. And then he figured he knew what to do. And I let him lead one by himself. And he came back, and I guess he decided to switch his wing tanks at the last minute. And his engine quit, and he crash landed and killed himself. And my name was on the airplane. The word got around that Major Miller had killed himself. But I had to write a letter on him as well as some of the others. Not so good.
Chris McGee had shot down 9 airplanes. He got the Navy Cross. Don Moore was flying a wing on him. And Don Moore said, you know, I hate this war. He had shot down 4 planes. He said, I hate this war, but I think Don Moore might have met the fate from the Japs shooting him down or got lost at sea.
My brother was killed in between 9, and he was killed on Guam. And
what was his name?
Raymond Hawes.
My friend that talked me into joining the Marines, we went off together, Paris Island and radio school together, and he was had sickness in the family and came back to Atlanta. And and when he came back, he had missed 2 weeks of radio school, so they sent him up to join the rifle group. He was at Iwo Jima, was killed at Iwo. So when I got word of that, he was the one I would like to mention, Jack Wheeler.
We lost a lot of good people. Yes, a lot of good people didn't come back, so we oftentimes forget them when we're talking, but I just want to pay tribute. It was a great squadron. Everybody I knew was giving it his best, and they were just a wonderful group of people.
Jack Quisenberry, my second section wingman, was an amazing guy, was a great pilot, shot down 2 airplanes on his first flight, came home and threw up. But anyway, Jack was an artist, and he ran a TV station in Juneau, Alaska, and a bunch of radio stations, and he and I have been friends forever. And he wound up with cancer, so he didn't come back.
If you got into a spin and your flaps were down, if you didn't pull up your flaps, you couldn't get out. And this one good fellow, good friend, going all the way through flight school with, he got in a spin at low altitude and didn't pull up his flaps and went in.
Would you like to mention his name for?
Yeah, George Hardig. He was a hell of an individual. He tried to organize us into a band. He played the clarinet, just incredible. We used to go down to San Diego to the little bars, and he used to sit in with the musicians and play this thing.
I lost 2 wingmen, but one of them was named Perry and one was named Kendall Sparger. And it was horrible accidents, but that was it. Happened to anybody.
You don't have enough tape. Red and I would throw so many names in that, remember when you talk about flying that our losses were greater in operation than they were in combat. I crack up when I hear the Navy hymn. We have heard that in taps and three-shot volleys so many times.
4 of us that went in as replacements. Our first tent that had 4 of us in, 2 of them got killed. And one of them got the Navy Cross, and the other one just had an accident. He, last couple of times he flew, he wrecked, but he still wanted to fly some more. But he did spin in off the end of the runway and got killed right there. And when you room with somebody even a week and fly with them, you get pretty attached to them. And both Wallman and Michaels were killed there within first 4 or 5 hops.
And it took a long time really to secure Rabaul, and we lost a lot of people. And some of the people that we lost were the best pilots we had. I remember when we first got out there, I roomed with a fellow by the name of Bob Alexander, and he was from Davenport, Iowa, and he was a poster boy. He was, you know, what the Marines would put up there and say, join the Marines, you know, be a flyer. But he had been a wrestler in college, like Pappy Boyington was a wrestler too. But he got shot down very early on, and I thought, man, if Bob got shot down, what chance do I have? But it didn't work out that way. Some of the best pilots were just in the wrong position at the wrong time. It really wasn't a case of being the best pilot. It was how fortunate you were. He was such a nice guy and such a good flyer. And you think that there he was, 22 years old, and his life was ended. And what he could have been sitting here today, right now. And he'd tell you some pretty good stories. But he was the one that I missed the most, yeah.
We had 2 or 3 losses that affected us, and there was a guy named Mike Zanker the Japanese took him over to one of their fields and sat him down, and they'd come and look at him, and he kind of went a little nuts and tried to get away, and he shot a couple of them, and they ended up shooting him, and he was a nice fellow.
That was Moon Mullins. He was our executive officer at 224 after we went to Japan. Unfortunately, Moon was out on a familiarization flight with a couple of new second lieutenants, and a crossover. One of the planes cut the cockpit out and killed Moon. And from what I know, in the few months I served with him, he was an outstanding pilot. The other one was also a 214 pilot, and that's Jack Bolt. Jack was our operations officer in the carrier squadron, the 452. And Jack, I think he got 5 planes during World War II, and I think he was in Korea. I think he was a transfer pilot in F-86. I think he got 5 more. Jack is still alive. He's down in Florida, and one of these days I got to go and see Jack. Others, Herb Valentine, real fine guy. I served with him in 323 for, well, I can't remember how many he shot down, but he was a squadron commander as captain. Another guy too, is a real crazy guy. He's dead, so I can say that now. And that's Jack Pittman. And Jack Pittman was a flying sergeant, then was commissioned. He flew with us in 224. Jack shot down 7 planes.
The 3 of my dear friends was a Marine Corps general by the name of Marion Carl, a wonderful Marine Corps aviator, one of the finest we've ever had. And 2 boys from the squadron, VMF 215, Ed Hernan, who was killed in Korea, and George Cross, who made it all through the wars and died a few years back. 3 great people and just wonderful folks, and I want to remember them forever.
Yes, we had another member then. He was an NAP at that time. His name is George Cross. He passed here a 3 years ago, and he actually, Zero caught his wing afire over a bow one time, and he got through into a cloud where it put out the fire, and he came home. But to hear him screaming on the radio is something you'll never forget, because we thought we were going to lose him, but we didn't. We lost him here a few years back from other reasons. His name was George Cross, K-R-O-S-S. Fine gentleman, and he was a fine Marine.
Len Gundert was a wonderful, wonderful man. And Korea was a funny existence. I guess it was the precursor of Vietnam. And Len had a Navy Cross from World War II, and we'd have what they call gunfire spot. And you'd sit there and you'd circle the battleship while it fired on shore batteries. Hell, that was a gravy hop. You know, who's gonna fire at you when you're over a battleship? Well, somebody opened up on Len, hit him, killed him. You know, the flames really got his lung. He got the body back. The flames were in his lungs. So it was, the old saying was, you can flip a coin up in the air so many times and eventually it's going to come down on edge.
I would say that I probably would give more tribute to some of those who came home because I was closer to them. Of the immediate people that were in the Quonset hut with me at Turtle Bay, in the foxholes at Okinawa, they came home with us. And Jack Holden is a real close friend. He lives in Mount Joy, Pennsylvania, which is about maybe 90 miles away. Al Kreuzberger lived on the West Coast. They were especially close people. And Tom Hardy, who lives down in Mississippi. They were very close friends. It's the first time I'd been away from home. I'd never been away from home. And these guys had been away from home, they'd been in college, so they were a great help to me in getting through everything while I was out there, but it was different.
One of the guys that was in my flight at Pensacola went all the way through with me. He went overseas 2 weeks ahead of me, and when I got over there, I was put into his squadron as a replacement. And we fought the whole war together. He lives down in Texas now.
What was his
but
name?
His name was B.B. Cooley.
Fortunately, I guess I keep the ones alive in my memory more than the ones that are gone. You know, we lived in the 10th with Wozniak, Zorn, and Weston, and the 4 of us went over, and come back together. Truesdale was in another tent. We always said he didn't have enough class to live with us, you know. And but we were very fortunate. Zorin got shot down, I got shot down, but we made it back.
My greatest buddy, Denver Smitty, was a Flint, Michigan guy. He got out after the war, went to GI Bill. Jimmy Faulkner, the nephew of William Faulkner, the author, got out and stayed in reserve, and he was a great Corsair pilot and a fighter pilot on World War II, and he died a few months ago, and we were very, very close friends all through all these years. My attaché in Indonesia, Colonel Schumann, was a night fighter ace, very quiet person, one of the extraordinary people. He made a huge contribution post-war in the intelligence community, and all my World War II fighter pilot guys. I hate to name any particular one of them. Some of them will be here, and you'll get to see them. But they're all unusual fellas. And they're still doing great things right now. One just became a judge. One's the chancellor of the University of Richmond, and they're both going to be here.
T.A. Brown, Theodore Brown. That's him up right on the top, who was just here. Also in this photograph, especially this gentleman here was Major Perry Lynn Schumann, and this man here was Sam Richards Jr. They were commanding officer and executive officer respectively. Both of them were majors, and both of them were 24 years old. Both of them were combat experienced in Guadalcanal, Rabaul, and some of those places down there. So it's incredible that two 24-year-old men would have the experience, intelligence, and ability to lead a squadron like this.
I had a lot of good friends in VMF 215. Don Aldrich was one of them. I think he shot down 20 zeros. Best man at my wedding. Chief Lou, we just interviewed. I was the one that named him Chief, and the name stuck.
Yeah, I was very impressed by Major York. He was the CO when we were in the Marshall's campaign. And he's a ground pounder CO, but he knew how to fly that airplane too.
That show, Baba Black Sheep, the planes you can't change. We didn't have any women. We didn't have the country club effect, but you have to have that kind of thing to get the women and kids to watch it. And of course, that's why we're talking about it today. He made us famous, although a lot of guys did not like the fact that they said a bunch of misfits, roustabout. We weren't. Well, some of our boys became mayors, some of them became congressmen, businessmen, and successful businessmen.
There were some who suffered great consequences and came back and are still living, and this 60 years later, but those who were killed immediately, they're all heroes to all the rest of us.
I can't listen to taps. The older I get, the more weepy I get.
I mentioned Phil DeLong was a commanding officer of mine, and is a great guy. He was a double ace in World War II, and just a fine fellow. General Doyle, that lives in Hilton Head, was another one of my COs and was instrumental in the development of my career. I want to thank the veterans for what they did, the sacrifices they give. It's fun. It's one thing to fly these planes. And of course, every time you take it off, you wonder, well, gee, I hope I do the right thing, and I hope, it doesn't break, or I hope I don't screw up. When those guys were taken off, whether it was land-based in the Solomons or Bougainville or off a carrier, when they were taking it off, somebody's going to be shooting at them. And I mean, that's entirely different.
Some people, and I guess we all maybe do a little bit, but I've tried to overcome that, say, I feel guilty because I didn't die because somebody else did. Why did I live? Well, you can't live that way, really. I mean, that's just the consequence of life. You don't have to go to war to somebody can die tomorrow and you wonder why they went and I didn't go. So we don't live through those things, but I had any number of close friends who were killed.
The boys that didn't return did just as good a job as the boys that did return, and maybe better. They sacrificed their life so we can go on and we can have families.
We had a fellow named Anderson that was transitioning out of a multi-engine. He wanted to be in fighters, and he came down, and we had thrown him quite a few things. We got him up to the point that we were bombing. And Andy was the 8th plane, and we would bombing and coming back up, which put me being number 1 right behind the 8th if I came back around. Well, as I don't know how many runs we'd made, 2 or 3, and Andy pulled up into Blackie Vatcher, who was it was 224 also down. He'd got back in my squadron. We got there in 212, and pulled up into as number 8 into Blackie Vatcher. And I'm right behind him, seeing that plane, the thing, a prop chew into the other one. Well, Blackie made it back. It shook him up and it tore up his plane pretty well. Well, he made it back to Cherry Point, but Anderson, I don't know whether his canopy hit into the other plane or what happened. But it did that, and it just rolled over like that, and the way it goes down with me behind him, trying to revive him by shouting at him over the radio, hopefully if he was. Boom, just like that. Of course, it'd take seconds. And Andy's wife was still in the hospital with a baby. And I had to go back, and boy, that was a hard one. I had to go back and go over to the hospital and tell her about that. And then you look back on those things, you said, now what could have I done? Andy shouldn't have been on that flight. Maybe. But those type things when you get into CO, did I make it happen? Could I have prevented, that type of thing? I don't know, is there any answer to that?
We got a batch of them. I can remember going to the Punch Bowl in Honolulu and seeing the names of some of these people who were extremely close to us, and I cracked up.
After 3 combat tours, we get to come home, the ones that are there.
I want to say it's been a pleasure to be here. I don't know if you people realize the number of heroes you've got in your hands.
I got 12 Air Medals and 3 DFCs.
So what was the Distinguished Flying Cross for?
That was for, well, I got 2 of them in World War II and then 2 of them in Korea.
I went to the dinner last night, and that was interesting, but nobody mentioned Jim Sweat has a Congressional Medal of Honor. Nobody mentioned it, and he didn't mention it. Hell, if it was mine, boy, I'd have up there waving it. Jim Sweat's pretty famous, and Archie Donahue, and other guys that aren't here, like Joe Foss, and they should be mentioned and referred to.
We pay tribute to all the veterans of the United States. We wear that medal for them, and particularly those who did not return. Well, we have a special group, those who died on the Bunker Hill. Every single one of them were buddies of ours, and we didn't know them personally, but we just loved them. They took good care of us, good food, good quarters, everything else. They were just great people. Great people.
I went back to Okinawa some 2 or 3 years ago for the Marine Corps University, visiting the 6 Marine Corps bases there, including old Shamu Field, which is Camp Hansen now. And the old field now is the main street of the main base, and it's a real built-up base. And you think to yourself, in fact, they took me in a landing craft and landed me on the beach where I landed 60 years ago. And you think, well, it couldn't have happened. You know, it's like a dream. It's a foggy remembrance, literally. Now, there are certain things you have a sharp memory of, but the overall thing, life has gone on, and that's history. It's in the back of your mind in many ways. And I think in later years, it's come forward in our minds.
Well, I was very fortunate. I had a girlfriend that was writing to me when I was over there, and she and I got married as soon as I got back, and I've had a pretty good life.
We had a group of 5, 1 down, 4 up all the time, and we were very close. We were in this, not all in the same tent, but we were really close. And the thing is that things were so busy out there at that particular time that you didn't realize what was happening in the other groups of 5 sometimes. You know, like the fellow Bob Klingman that got chewed the Jap's tail off, and I'm sure you heard that story. And the squadron itself was very closely knit, and we've had a reunion every 2 years since God knows when, and we've had some great ones, and that's one of the reasons we're here today, because some of our fellow pilots are here. So there was a lot of camaraderie there. It was pretty good, and still is. People have traveled with each other, lived near each other, and done all kinds of things. You know, that makes a real bond. And I think because of the fact that we didn't get our ass shot off, that was another reason. You know.
It was a good airplane. Rugged. I've seen it come with most of the tail shot away, but it was still very good. I would, if I had to go back to combat again, I wouldn't object to going in it.
By the way, I overcome my fear of Corsair, and that brought me home many a time when I don't know if any other airplane could have done it.
Corsairs, that's all we wanted.
You look back on it, I sure had better than my fair share of squadron in time. I actually commanded, I think the number was 8 flying squadrons on that thing, leading all the way, mostly Corsairs, 1s, FOU-4s, but leading up into jets. I never served in a group staff, and I never served on a wing staff. Every time I went to the wing, I was sent to a squadron. And I wound up, of course, CO, because I had the thing down in there, and I stayed with it. Next time I'd go down, they'd send me down squadron again. It made me happy. I was fine.
It's funny when you're in the service how you cuss it out and everything else, and you bitch and moan. But now that I'm a retired Marine, I look back at it and I think it's the best outfit in the world.
Lean, mean Marines.
I look forward to flying that bird. I look forward to flying anything. I just wish I could have gone on flying them. I can't afford them now, so I can't fly them now, or I would.
Finest airplane I ever flew, and I've flown maybe 20 different types, and I still love the bird.
Anybody that ever has a chance to fly a combat aircraft such as the Corsair, they should always take advantage of it, because it was one of the greatest airplanes that I've ever flown. And I've flown the P-51, I've flown 41 different aircraft. So as far as the ones that fly, I like that better than any of them.
The U-bird was a great one. And I think everybody's kind of finally realized it's about as good as they come. They always talk about the P-51 and the P-38 and those, but we had experience during World War II against them. Friendly fire, you know. And we managed to hold on.
I just like to say to all the guys who risked their all and gave their all for our country, and I hope to God that your generation and your succeeding generation will do the same thing. I know they can.
The idea that some people say thank you means a lot.
So starting in '95, the 50th reunion of the Battle of Okinawa, we started coming to Pensacola every year. And it's been really great to see all of these people that you knew when they were under 21 or at least under 30. And I hated those shots.
You never well, S&J is the biggest one I ever seen.
That's a good question.
Well, and then the old Stearmans started that way.
By the way, I'm a one shell guy. I never had to use two shells.
You didn't fly any of the old ones, at least.
You must have started off with an E then. At first they supposed to have been a C shell.
That's a war story.
D shell.
Well, didn't they? I don't know whether they made an E or not, but it.
Well, we're all old gentlemen now. they don't party as they used to.
It was really a boys' war. I think the squadron commander after Major Hammond, I think, was only 23 years of age. His name was Major Barnum.
I was 18 years of age. I was commissioned in April of 1944, and I was 20 years old in September of 44. The Battle of Okinawa ended in August, like August the 14th, if I remember correctly, Red, and I was 21 on September the 16th. So I went into, and the war ended before I was 21.
We were 18 and 20-year-old kids, skinny kids, doing what we had to do, and it's nice to see them 50, 60 years later and knowing that they're still doing great things. But the World War II guys that I were with, I just like to think they're just extraordinary guys, that's all. I love them all. And I know they think the same of me, and it makes me feel really, really, I ask for no other acknowledgement except for my buddies.
One of the things I'd like to say as a World War II veteran, we didn't do anything special. You really have to think of it, that 16 million men and women were in the service. So everybody was doing their job. Nobody was doing anything special. We just went out there and did our own thing. And nobody owes anybody anything. The country's treated me real good, and I'm real happy with what I did.
What won the war was farm boys from Iowa and city boys from Chicago and all over the country just doing the job they were given to do the best they could, and that's what won the war. We had a wonderful ground crew. Without them, we would have been useless, and we all admired our ground crew, and other squadrons did too. Our ground crew, of whom Charlie Fitzgerald was one, who you just talked to, was one of the most admired ground crews out there, I think. So while we all like to talk to the aces and relive their experiences with them, we too often forget that the other people, so whether it's a mess cook or a truck driver or a mechanic or a radio man, it took us all to win that war, and that's what counted.
The relationship is so close in the squadron in combat. There's something about being in battle that brings the group together. A little more than a squadron who's not in combat. So we were very, very close to all of these fellas. We ate, we slept together, we, partied together. It's pretty hard-working group of guys who worked hard and played hard.
Camaraderie and companionship and everything was terrific. We knew that we were in a special place at a special time, and we didn't realize it as much then as we do now.
It was an awfully valuable experience looking back on it. Didn't think so at the time, we had some funny things, and you, at that stage of the game and at that age in life, you didn't think about it, but I can look back and I learned a number of things that have helped me all of my life.
We were young and tough, and we didn't know how tough it was on us. And so we were just, willing to do everything that was asked of us to try to help the effort to be victorious in that battle.
In the Marine Corps, you don't start out to do something and quit. You finish. And that has come in handy all through my life. There's no excuse for failure.
We don't say I used to be a Marine. We say I am a Marine. Marine for life. In some way, the Marines instill that into everybody. I respected my officers. I never had any feelings of jealousy or anything like that. We were just proud of them because they were in a tight spot. And it took courage to do what they did. But you feel for them when they had to go out and face death, I know I would have been scared. I'm sure they were, but they went ahead and did it.
Well, of course, I spent 30 years in World War II. It was just a small part of my career in the service. Had duty in Korea, of course, and then in Vietnam also. I think all of us were great patriots, and we still are. And we follow the situation in our country right now like most everybody does, and still great patriots that we think we are.
I was your age when I was in the service, and we had a lot of different friends, a lot of camaraderie. But now to pass on to your generation, from my generation, all I can say is be the same as we were. Have a love for your country, a respect for your country, and try to keep everybody straight and not doing the wrong thing.
Well, the particular experience, it's probably the greatest one that we ever had. And although other things happen in life and you have a memory that's good or bad, this is the one standard thing that just pops up all the time. It's almost like it was yesterday. And as far as how we feel about it, I think the good feeling is that we felt we contributed enough so that the next generation has the freedom that they have now. And if we had failed or we were overcome, it would have been very, very difficult and impossible probably for this country. And the rewarding thing is that every once in a while somebody comes up and says thank you.
I oftentimes said that I'd give every moment of the rest of my life if I could just be with BMF 215 on one more mission.
Absolutely the best part of flying that airplane is coming to the shows like this one and getting the old timers to come in and you know, just seeing their reactions, see their faces. You know, we got him up and got his daughters to sit in the airplane and just to see the look on his face, you know, that somehow then they knew what their father had done. So it's that's hands down the best part of the whole thing.
The thing I think we can't afford to forget is how important that they are to remain flying, just to remind this country of how important that they were, how important that the sacrifices that World War II imposed on so many people. Tom Brokaw calls the greatest generation. Well, I wholeheartedly believe in that. I think that right now it overpowers any need to put them on the ground as artifacts, that they keep flying to remind people how important all that was.
These gentlemen, these older gentlemen that flew these and fought with them, they all come up to you and thank you for bringing these airplanes to the air show. And of course, my standard answer to them is, you know, we get to have all the fun. You guys had to do all the work. And I mean, we owe our thanks to them. They don't owe any thanks to us.
So I want to thank every one of those guys personally. Our prayers go out to the families of those that were lost, and they're just great guys.
It's also neat to be here with the pilots from World War II. What those guys did was just difficult.
If it hadn't been for God, Pappy, and the Corsair, I wouldn't be here.
It's going to be such a joy this afternoon to fly with all the Corsairs. We'll make some great passes for the people and do honor to all the combat veterans and all the veterans of all the wars. We're just proud to do it. All of us down the line here are just proud to fly for all the people, and especially for the young children. But it's just an honor to fly the Corsair.
Oh, it's just makes your heart stop to hear that engine again, almost. It was just wonderful. It was a wonderful plane, really.
here we are at 11 o'clock at night, and we're towing Corsairs, putting them away.
Oh. Well, after we leave, you know who's gonna stop us? We never know. Yeah, no, there's no hour. Well. Well, yeah, I guess it's not about that. Yeah, that works.
I want to say thank you very much for taking the time to talking with us.
Certainly, I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's great to meet you.
Yeah.
You know what? You're free to go, buddy.
Okay. I'll see you.
We'll let you go.
10 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Yeah, what we're gonna do is here at about 4 o'clock, Ray's gonna come out. He's gonna help me into the back of this, and we're gonna go ahead and start this up. And if you